Who's
No, it's
speaking?
over there.
Moisey,
So Mayor, send it over Zoom.
Moisey, why don't you plug it into the corner over there?
Yes, we
Oh,
can
Ben,
do
how are you,
that.
Ben?
I think if you stick it in that corner and just make it face me that way.
No, you get a Wi-Fi and put it in that corner over there.
Yeah.
So,
Will it?
Yeah, why not?
Does the Wi-Fi extender
Basically,
need to
it
go?
brings it
Make sure you
wide
access
and
the
see.
recorder. Well, I'll put it there, no problem.
You just know you're being recorded for eternity now.
So Mayor, send
Okay, let's start. It's ready.
Anybody stop you on the street and say, "Oh, are you the guy from YouTube?"
like an
That's
arrow.
right. What do we do? I've got 100,000. What?
Like an arrow. Gives you extends your. No.
Believe you,
oh, there's so much.
Oh, yes, the butler.
Chas v'sholom. How
You
chacham
need to do is avoid it.
Oh.
Rishi, thank you very much for letting us use your mobile phone. As no, the truth is, it's working fine. If you're okay with it, if you run out. Right.
So why do you phone it?
It's like
That's I leave your phone. Give me your phone.
Can you imagine that?
I won't have time to prepare for the show. Right. Okay, running a bit late. We're up to Bez Hashem Daled Amud Aleph, the top line. How do you mute somebody? No, everything's fine. It's fine. A tiny bit. We're discussing the fact that when the person talks, he should try his best to speak in a positive, clean language. And now the Gemara tells us a story which needs a tiny bit of background. The Rav and Reb Chia were related. Rav and Reb Chia, very, very complicated relationship. That Reb Chia was Rav's uncle in two different ways. That means Rav's parents, you have to keep track of it for a minute. It's not essential to the whole Gemara, but it comes up in a few places in Shas. It's good to know it. Rav and Reb Chia were related. Rav's father and mother were brother and sister of Reb Chia. Now you should all be shouting, how can a brother marry a sister? We'll leave that for 1 second. No, the real sisters. But Rav's father and mother were both brother and sister to Reb Chia. In fact, Rashi tells us that Reb Chia's father, who was called Reb Acha, if you're interested, had 5 children: Evoy, Chana with the Aleph, Shiloi, Marsa, and Reb Chia. So if you ever give an out of names, you can go out of your children, Shiloi or Marsa or Evoy. That's nice names. If you run out of boys' names, what? Right. So now the question is, how can the brother marry a sister? The answer, Rashi and Hedge explains at great length, but here actually very briefly. They were both half brothers and half sisters. That means Reb Chia's father married a woman, had a child. Then the wife was nifter. He married another woman. They had a child. Then the father was nifter, and then the mother married another husband, and they had a child. So what happened was the two outer children did not share neither mother nor father, so they were permitted. The middle child was Reb Chia, and therefore he had a half brother on one side, a half sister on the other side, and Rav was born from this union between the half brother of Reb Chia on one side, half brother on the sister. It means that because Reb Chia had a half brother and a half sister, they married each other and had a child called Rav. So Gemara said like this: Rav Bar Achva de Reb Chia, he was the son of the brother of Reb Chia. Ubar Achse was the son of his daughter, his sister. Kisolik lahassam. When Rav went from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael to visit his uncle Reb Chia. So what did his uncle ask him? Omalei, Ema Kayemes. Some say that was his mother's name. Some say it means mother. It's Machlekes Nishonim. Is your mother alive? Now his mother had been nifter. So what would a person, a simple person, would say? No, she was nifter. We don't want to give bad news. So he said to him, Omalei. So Rav said to Reb Chia, instead of asking me about my mother, you should ask me about my father. Eivoy Kayim. Is my father Eivoy alive? So he said to him, Omalei. Sorry, I made a mistake. I missed out that. Over he came. First he asked about his father. Asked me about my mother. The truth is, both his father and his mother had been nifta. The Rab was reluctant to say that. So what Rab did was a very simple method. The Ruchir asked about his father. He said to him, I don't understand why you asked me about my father. Ask me about my mother. And when he asked him about his mother, he then immediately replied, why did you ask me about my father? That what? That both had been nifta. So Amalei the Shamish. So Ruchir said to his Shamish, because at the end of the day, Ruchir now had lost his brother and his sister. So he's got the Shiur of Shiva. Take off my shoes. I want to go for a bath. Now, an oval is not allowed to wear shoes, and he's not allowed to go for a bath. So he was doing something very strange. So take off my shoes and help me get to the bathhouse. Shema mino tulas. We learn from this story 3 halachas. Shema mino oval also b'nilas a sandal. The fact that he told him to take off his shoes is a raya that what? That a mourner is forbidden to wear shoes. So therefore he said, take off my shoes. V'shema mino shmur v'choyken neges l'yom echad. If a person hears bad news, meaning that he lost a close relative, if it's after a long time, then he only has to sit shiva for one day. And finally, that part of the day is like the whole day. And now we understand why Ruchir did this. Ruchir did not need a bath straight away. It's unlikely in the middle of the day. Ruchir wanted to teach his Talmidim this halacha. So what he did was he took off his shoes straight away to show that he's got Chiva Avedus. And then he straight away said, let me go for a bath. That way, to teach the Talmidim that you only need to shiva for one day and only for a short amount of the day. Rashi points out that why didn't he do Kriya? What about the mitzvah of Kriya? There's a mitzvah of Kriya when the relative is nifta. Why did Ruchir not do Kriya? It says of Rashi from here, it's a very beautiful sefer came out, the whole of Rashi from Pesachim, that he says from here is a right that you only have to do Kriya if you hear it within the Shloshim. If it's after the Shloshim, you do not need to do Kriya. He passed us like that as well. So we learned 3 halachas. And the main reason we brought it in was to teach us that a person has to do his best to speak in the correct way. Ruchir did not want to say my father was nifta. Instead, he said, ask about my mother. And this way, he managed to make it clear. Now the Gemara mentions a little bit more about speech. Yehuda Omar doin dini. Every single opportunity, he would say, let's go to Beis Din. He was a great litigator. That means he constantly was looking for fights in Beis Din. So Omri Shema Minomi Don Kasi, he must come from Sheva Don. Dichsiv, it says by Don, Yotin Amri Kachat Shifte Yisrael, that Don is a nation which they constantly like to go into justice. If you see somebody who's constantly litigating, it must be from the Shevet of Don. There was somebody who used to say, Akef Yamo, Asisni Biroso. Rashi has 2 explanations. One explanation is that if I ever had the opportunity to build a palace, I'll build it by the seaside. He loved the seaside, don't we all? So therefore he said, if I could have a palace to build, I'll build it at the seaside. That's one pshat Rashi. Another pshat Rashi brings is that he used to say a tree which is barren on the seaside is worth the same amount as a lush tree elsewhere. He had a big affinity to the seaside. So they said, what happened was, Bodku, they checked, Vashkochu, and they found him Zvulun Kos. He came from Zvulun. Zvulun wants to live by the seaside. And here the Chashukei Chemet says a very interesting thing. What happens if you've got a kohen? Nowadays, unfortunately, our Mesiras for Kohuna is not 100% as strong as perhaps we might like it. What happens if you've got a kohen who constantly says, let me go to Beis Din? Or alternatively, a kohen who says, I love the seaside. If I could build a palace, the only place I'd build a palace, the next time you build a palace, where would you build it? On the seaside. You'd have a problem. Maybe he's coming from Shevet Don or Zvulun. The Gemara says, he said somebody asked him, and he didn't know what to do. So he went to Chaim Kanievsky. That's the mile of being Chashukei Chemet. Chashukei Chemet is the Silverstein, mile of having a brother like Chaim Kanievsky. He said to him, no, because for all you know, it comes from his mother's side. There's no why it comes from his father's side. Okay. Why is it just interesting? What? Yeah, yes, I know. Okay. Nice. The Gemara mentions it only because of the fact that we're speaking about language, but I'll just mention it because it's an interesting question to ponder about. Now we're going to go into the halachas of Dikas Chametz. We are finished with all the Agadat. Well, it's good to have more Agadat later, but we're finished basically with Agadat. We'll come into the halachas of Dikas Chametz. I just want to say a very short. B'dikas chametz is not a simple mitzvah. It is a very choshev mitzvah. It's a very important mitzvah. I get a lot of chizuk from the fact I once heard a shiur from Shimshon Pinkas, and I actually sent it over this way to somebody. He said he also heard the same shiur. Shimshon Pinkas said that he was a very, very great person. Anybody with Shimshon Pinkas, we can't imagine his greatness. And he said his greatness became from the mitzvah of b'dikas chametz. I don't know if you know the story, but I say it very, very briefly. One year, he was a bacher, like 2021, and a few bachim slept in the same dira. And what happened was they all went away for Yom Tov, and he realized he was the only one left in the dira. And nobody had bothered to check b'dikas chametz. Being a bachim's dira, it was filthy. So what happened was he had to spend hours night with b'dikas chametz, cleaning and checking for chametz. When he finished, he suddenly realized that he also owned the roof. And he went up to the roof, and it was covered in boxes and all kinds of paraphernalia. And he spent the whole night doing b'dikas chametz. It took him the entire night until the morning doing b'dikas chametz. And he felt a special ashra of kedusha after that. He said this story. I heard this story from him. A few years later, unfortunately, he was killed in a car accident. Does anybody know when he was killed? In the car accident? No. The night of b'dikas chametz. It's a fascinating thing. But Rabbi says it's a choshev mitzvah. It's a mitzvah which requires effort. To see, but now we're going to have a very lot of the halachas and the lamdas. Let's get into it. It says more like this: the night. Everybody agrees with that. So the question is, mechti, since there's machlokes of Yudam Amir. Let's get to very clear. There are 3 times on Erev Pesach. After Chatzos, it is also to have chometz min haTorah. Min haTorah, it is also to have chometz for midday. In the early morning, it is permitted completely. Many people sit down to a chometz breakfast, not with wives who are nervous, but if you don't have a nervous wife, you can sit down and have yourself toast on Erev Pesach. There's an in-between time, which is also midrabanon, and there's a shitta that they split the issa drabanon into 2. An issa to eat, and then later an issa to get pleasure. So we've actually got 3 distinct times: the time which is mutter, the time which is also natur, the time which is also midrabanon. Later we're going to discuss this machlokes at very great length. Machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda. But everybody agrees that the real issa only starts midday. So if you were to ask, when should you do b'dikas chametz? When would you say b'dikas chametz? Midday. Says the Gemara. Let's check in the sixth hour. Imam Chalava points out that it would be very hard to check in the 6th hour, because at the end of the day, if you check in the 6th hour, it might take you longer than an hour, and before you know, you still got chametz in the house. So he says, interestingly, shis means the beginning of the 6th hour. And when are you asking in that 30 chametz? The end of the 6th hour. He says, in an hour, you can easily check your house. Alternatively, the Gemara means that you should check and be finished by the 6th hour. So, okay. But the Gemara's main question is, let's check chametz on Pesach, Pesach. As you say to me, no, Zrizim Makdim in the mitzvahs. We have a concept of Zrizim Makdim in the mitzvahs. The earlier you could do, the better. Nivdik with safos. Let's check in the morning. Says Dichsev, Ubayom Ashmini Yimur B'Sar Losek. The Tanya Kol Hayom Kulei Kosher Lemila. Let's just Zrizim Makdim in the mitzvahs. Shlema Yeshkem Avar Boika. We see that Avram Avinu, who was a Zoriz, when did he go to do the mitzvah of the Akedah? In the morning. He didn't start the night before. So therefore we see that the earliest, even according to the Manama, Zrizim Makdim in the mitzvahs, but it is only from midday. It's only from the morning, but not before the morning. Says the Gemara, Omar Nachman by Yitzchak, B'Shosh B'dei Odom Mitzuin B'Boteim. We want 2 reasons. He gives actually 2 distinct reasons. One, we want to find a time when people are likely to be home. If you do it midday, most people have already gone to work by then. So we want to find a time when people are at home, that's in the evening. Furthermore, candlelight is best for bedika, and the more later will explain that in order to be able to check in nooks and crannies, a candlelight works the best. So again, the Gemara says that there are 2 distinct reasons they said it the night before. One is because most people are at home then, but during the day they're not, and also because candlelight works at night. The Ran's got very lot of Pesachim. The Ran Pesachim is very long. He asks, why do you need both? And he says an interesting thing. He says that the fact that most people are not at home would not be enough of a reason for Chazal to uproot a mitzvah. Got a mitzvah, so go home and just do the mitzvah. But since it is a better way of being mekayem the mitzvah, Chazal allowed for it. And then he says that the logic would be, so let's say, just say the Oyanei Yofel B'dika. He says, no, making it a better way to do a mitzvah also won't be enough. You have to have both cheshbonos to work it out. One is in order because you'll be able to make kind the mitzvah because most people will be at home, and plus it's the better way to do the mitzvah. So therefore they pushed it off to the evening before. Says the Gemara, Omar Abaya, Hilkach therefore Haitzuva Ma'abon Tamut Chacham. A person should not start learning the night of the 13th coming on to the 14th, in case he'll get involved in his learning, he'll come to desist and not to do the mitzvah. He shouldn't learn the night of the 13th of Pesach. And in fact, the Mechaber's got a whole simon, not just not allowed to learn, not allowed to start a meal, you're not allowed to start anything that can take a long time. There's a big shaila, which we'll discuss another time, is what happens if you're already learning, when do you have to stop learning? It's one of these times, half an hour before the night of the 14th of Nisan, there's a whole simon Shulchan Aruch, all the things you're not allowed to do, in case you might come, chas v'shalom, to get so involved, even in learning, which is very important. The Hebrew Rashi in his horrors, that why the Gemara mentions this, it says there's a special inyan to learn between day and night and between night and day. As just before the day, when night turns to the Mekasha Yomi v'Layla b'Torah, it says it's a special thing. So you might have thought if that's the case, he should learn. Kamash no, the mitzvah of Dikas Chametz is greater, and therefore, even though it's a special, unique time to learn, you shouldn't learn that. Okay. If you rent a house to your friend on the 14th of Nisan, many times people do it. They say, do you want to rent a flat there at Sol or house? You're coming to stay by your parents. So do you want the house from the 14th of Nisan till after Pesach? Ami livduk. Who should check? And Amaski livduk the Chamir the day. At the end of the day, it's his chametz. Any chametz there, it was certainly from the maski. What's good words in English? Landlord. Oh. A landlord, it's his chametz. On the tenant should rent. It should check the issur, because on Pesach, if he finds the chametz, it will be his. There's actually quite a lot of lomdus on this. The question is, if you remember, we mentioned very briefly as to what exactly the sibba of b'dikas chametz. Is it because you might come to eat it? That means the reason I want you to check is you might come to eat it because you've already done bittul chametz. So the reason I want you to check is you might come to eat it. Or is the issa because of bad yavor, bad yamodza, meaning that if you don't check, you may have chametz in your cupboard which you're not aware of, and you'll be over the issa of owning chametz. So the chashash is you might forget to do bittul. That is the machlokas. What? No, if you've done bittul, you won't be over bad yavor. That means the Sudat Vom is, this is the first Rashi, one of the first Rashi, I mentioned very briefly when she went in longer. There's the Sudat the Machlikas goes again and again, the Kirsach, as to what is the Sud. Why were Chazal Masakid it? Is because we were scared you're going to eat it, because the owning we don't care about, because we know that people do bittul. Or Faked, the Issa is because of owning, and the reason why we're not relying on bittul is because scared you'll forget about bittul. That is the Machlikas Rishonim, Rashi on Tes in the beginning. L'ch'ora, you could say that is the Shaila over here. If the chashash is we might come to eat chametz on Pesach, so who should do the b'dikas chametz? The tenant, because the landlord is not going to be there. If I rent you my house, I'm not going to be there. So you check the chametz, don't check the chametz. I'm never going to eat the chametz. If the chashash is because of owning chametz, it's not your chametz. If I'm the landlord, it's my chametz. I'll be over by the motzah. So the shaila of the Gemara is this machlikas Rishonim. Now, since the Rishonim don't want to say that this is because each Rishon obviously holds his svah, so they all explain how both start. Maybe to look at Tosfos. Tosfos goes through it. Okay, I don't go too much into it. I just say one nekuda. Rashi again on this nekuda says that there's an issa to have in your house chametz of another yid, of another goy's mutter, even if it's not yours. If the yid is chametz of a yid is forbidden, and therefore over here even the tenant would be issa. Oh, so the shaila of the Gemara is only. So they explain like this: the shaila of the Gemara is only who did Chazal put the chiyuv on. That means we're not discussing now the lomdas why they made it. The shaila is once Chazal made a mitzvah of dikas chametz, who did they be mechayev the mitzvah? Who did they place the mitzvah? Toshima. What do you say?
House is not mine.
The house is whose? No, so it belonged. What do you mean?
I mean, place up. I only need to make the leaks home in one room. It's the same people coming places in the hotel.
Right. So that's the same shaila. Do they have to check? If you come to a hotel room on the 14th, so that you can always set up a shliach. You could ask the landlord, will he check for you? But if he doesn't check for you, maybe you've got a chiyuv when you come there to check. That's the shaila. I remember that years ago, somebody came to stay by his parents-in-law for Pesach. His father-in-law said to him, "No, you take up 2 rooms, right? Let's say come with a few kids. You take up 2 rooms. So I'm leaving you those 2 rooms to show Tichas. That can't be, well, I'm not going to start checking this big house to check. So you've got to check those 2 rooms. The Gemara says, Toshima. That the tenant is his job to make a mezuzah. So you see that when Chazal made a chiyuv, a Torah gives a mitzvah, we give it to the tenant. So Moses says you can't compare. Hossam, their mezuzah is an obligation on the tenant. So Rashi adds an interesting svar. Says Rashi, it's about 4 lines down. The purpose of mezuzah is to guard you. Since the whole purpose of mezuzah is to keep you safe, to keep you protected, so therefore, obviously, it's your job. It's like, for example, you want to eat. It's the tenant's job to find himself food. He wants to be protected. He has to provide it. But by matzah, by b'dikas chometz, who said it's got to do with that svor? No, there was chometz all year round. That's not so we're not talking about where he's selling it to a goy. Yes. Well, I'm not sure again.
Now it's a
no, it's always got space for this. That's a different story. It's not because of machshir. Nowadays, what people do is they rent out the property to a goy or something, and then the potter not because then it's not their property. No. But it's not because machshir it is a machshir. Nowadays, that's right. That means the case. It's on the question is when the landlord owns a property, so of course there's chometz there.
If no one's going in there,
yes,
property,
yes,
and he doesn't have to.
He does. Let's say a person moves out and he doesn't rent it out to a goy, and he leaves the house empty. He's mechuyev to check the chometz. That is the halacha. A person leaves the property empty. He's mechuyev to check the chometz. It's only if he gives.
No, you've not been in there.
Oh, that's only if you've never been there. If you've never used it.
You know nobody's using it.
You know to use it on Pesach doesn't help you, but you know that people use it right through the year. Let's say, for example, you know that the whole Pesach you're not going to go into one of the rooms in your house. You still have to check for chometz in that room, because at the end of the day, for all you know, let's say you might have a nice loaf of bread there. Chometz is referred to the whole year. Oh, the whole year, yeah. But not on Pesach.
No, but now this empty flat has been cleaned out, sorted.
That's
no one's been in there. On the...
That's only if you're sure that nobody has. Here we're talking about somebody who's got a proper property. He lives there all the time. So he's machlis chometz everywhere, and then he moves out, and then he gives it to another yid. So it's his job. He could own chometz there. So the word says, if you rent a house to your friend, if you haven't given him the key, and Chol Arbos or the 14th has occurred, it belongs to the maskil. It's up to this. So the Gemara says it depends when you get the key to your room. If at the night of B'dikas Chometz you've got the key to your room, mechuyev to check for chometz yourself. If you haven't got it yet, it's up to the landlord. Rashi explains the svar because he says that getting the key is a kinyan, and now it belongs to you. So once it belongs to you, it's your property. You have to check for chometz. That's how Rashi explains. Look at Rashi. It belongs to him. It's fake Tosfos that in the Gemara, when it talks about how you're koina property, it says, what's the 3 ways to be koina property? Kesef, shtar, and chazaka. It doesn't mention property giving over the keys. So therefore, how can you say that getting a key gives you the control? So Tosfos says, Be'emes is that we're talking about where he hasn't yet acquired it. But once I've given you the key, I'm saying to you indirectly, look, I've given you the key. So now only you have access to the property. So therefore, I'm expecting you to do it. Therefore, even though you haven't yet owned it, but if I've given you the key, I'm asking you to take it over. That's how Tosfos understands it. And then Tosfos adds a very interesting small point. That let's say, for example, I go away for Pesach. And what happens is, many times they do that, is you give your key to a neighbor, you say, in case, I don't know, some post comes or somebody needs something from my house, take the key to my house. Does that mean that you've got now to check his chometz? No. So Tosfos, because Mesiras Mafteach is only an indication, that's how Tosfos finishes off, only when he tells you that you're eventually going to have the property. So if I give you the key and eventually you're going to have the property, then you have to b'dikas chometz. But if you're not, then that's not the case. Okay. What? So if you get the key to a house, then you have to. You have to check the whole thing. You have to check the whole thing. It's very strange. Yes. If you buy a property or you rent a property Erev Pesach,
You go to
and you're going to use it on Pesach, even if you're not going to use it on Pesach, even if you're not going to use it on Pesach, even if it's locked, you have to check the chametz. You can sell it to a guy.
Yeah, I'm saying.
I remember once I was by Blind, was selling by chametz, and somebody came in, he had just bought a property on 13th of Nisan. I said, you have to check the entire chametz in the house. It's I've not even done anything. I'm going to have build this for like 6 months. No, you have to check the entire house, unless you rent it out to a guy. But then you can't. Once you own the property, so it's
You can
yours.
sell hummus, no?
Right, you can sell it. You can sell it. No, it's not enough to sell the chametz. You also have to sell the place where it is if you don't want to do it because chametz. What do you say? Oh, if you rent out to a guy, you give him the key before the 14th, it's okay. That's even better. If you rent out a property on the 14th, can you rely on the fact that it's been checked or not? The my nafkimina. What's the nafkimina? The shaila, Gemara asks the kasha, let's ask him. Let's ask him. That means, let's say I go to Tolia and I rent the property. 14th of this and I get it. What's the shaila? Do I need to rely chazak when it's been checked or not? Why can't I go and ask him? The one over here adds a line which has been quoted a very lot. I'll just say very briefly what the right line is. He says, never mind in a case where I'm not, where he hasn't checked it, that by asking him I can find out that he's checked it. But even in the case where he has checked it, at the very least, you have to verify that he's checked it. Because he says, when you have a possibility to verify something with easily, you're mechuyev to verify it, even if there's a chazaka that it's okay. Even if there's a chazaka that it's okay. If you can easily verify to be 100% sure, that means even if you've got a chazaka that it's okay, even if you've got a chazaka that it's boduk, but let's say we have a chazaka boduk, let's say we have a chazaka that people do the job. But since you can verify it, you're mechuyev to verify it. What's a daf kimina? If let's say you buy a packet of nuts, and you know that the vast majority of these nuts are okay, are you mechuyev to look at them or not? This Ran is mashba that you are, because even when you've got a chazaka that it's okay, says the Ran, if you can verify it, you should have to verify it. There are those who argue on this one, but it's quoted as one of the Ma'akimis remark. Okay, says, well, let's ask him. He's not there. That means I rent a property and the landlord is gone. I can't ask him. Now this shaila is basically a shaila. We know that the halacha is, was the landlord mechuyev to do b'tichas nights before? Was he mechuyev? But yes, he was. He only gave me the property on the 14th. I came to you and I said to you, because I rent your property on the 14th. Were you mechuyev to check the chametz night before? Of course you were, because I only came to you on the 14th. So the question is, can we rely on the fact that Yidden keep the mitzvahs in the correct way? Can we be confident that Yidden keep the mitzvahs the right way? Now we always have right. So we have a principle called a chava. A chava is somebody that we can be sure that he always takes tumas and maisus correctly. And now ma'aretz, we're not sure. That's why we have the concept of tamai. Tamai is when we're not sure if they take tumas and maisus correctly. Regarding Amoritz, we only believe on Shabbos. Very good. And Amoritz is believed on Shabbos, but generally we don't believe tumas and maisus. Why? Because Amoritzim, they're not so makbid about tumas and maisus. So the question is, says the Gemara, do we consider every Yid regarding bedikas chametz as a chava, meaning as somebody who keeps it correctly? Why should we consider? Because perhaps the mitzvah of bedikas chametz is such a precious mitzvah that we could be assured, as Imam Chava says, that everybody keeps it because we are confident that people keep it. It's not like tumas and maisus, we know some people do, some people don't. Bedikas chametz perhaps is a mitzvah which is so precious that we are sure that everybody keeps it. Everybody's believed that chametz. Even women, even avodim kenanim, and even children. Why are they believed? Base. Now over here, the Gemara is going to go through a shakla entire back and forth, and only in the maskana do we get it clear. Let's get it clear. The Gemara says like this: if you ask a child, 8-year-old child, was this house checked for chametz? What's the din? He's believed. You ask a woman, you ask a guy, he's believed. Why is he believed? Says Gemara Daladon base. It must be that we're not relying on his words because his words is useless. It must be because we're sure without his words that the house is checked. Do we consider everybody to be on the same level as a chava regarding tumas and maisus? Regarding B'dikas Chametz, the Tanya Chavetz Shemes, if a Tam Chochem or Chavetz dies, V'niach Megum Alei Aperos leaves a complete drawer full of fruit, even if you only bought the fruit that day, and the Cheskas Miskonim, so therefore we can be sure that they've been taken to a Samaisas, just like if you go to Tam Chachem's house. You do not need to worry about Tumas Samaisas. So too, you go to anybody's house, you can be sure that they've done B'dikas Chametz. Says the Gemara, Umimai. How do you know the reason is? Because you can be sure they've done Tumas, that they've done B'dikas Chametz. Maybe be'emes, we don't believe that it's Cheskos Baduk. Maybe you can't rely that everybody's done B'dikas Chametz. The reason over here we're sure it's Baduk is why? Because the child told us, the 8-year-old boy stands there and tells us, I remember my father checking for chametz. I saw it being done. So maybe we're relying on the witness and forget, if you think about it that way around, it's actually a diuk that otherwise we would assume it's not baduk. If not for the fact the child's telling us, what would we assume? That it's no good. There's a way on the contrary that it doesn't work. Let's the word side. The word of an 8-year-old child, is it worth anything for us? Why should we believe an 8-year-old child not believed? Says, well, okay, so let's ignore his speech. And rather, you're saying the reason we believe, the reason why it's checked is according to this stage of the Gemara is why do we trust? Because we say, everybody, we believe that everybody checks. If it is true that we always assume that everybody checks the house for chametz, then there's nothing to do with this child speaking. Then why is it checked? Because of the fact that every house, when you walk around the house, you can be sure that it's been checked. If that is the case, why doesn't Vaisa tell us that if an 8-year-old or wife or an Eved Kanani tells us the house has been checked, we believe them? That's not what the Vaisa should say. It's nothing to do with believing them. It's to do with the fact that the house has a chazaka, it has a status that we know it's been checked. And therefore, it's nothing to do with listening to these little children. So Elamai said, well, now retracts. As I said, the Gemara goes back and forth. It's because of these people spoke. If they would not have said, Loi, Tiv should be made in Cheskose Badu. So you should come out from here that we don't believe, and therefore, unless the child says so, Loi. Really, we assume that it is Badu. We know it's not being checked. The Gemara says like this price is talked about a completely different shaila. Our shaila was, when we don't know did anybody check the chametz or not, can we assume it was checked? That's one shaila, new shaila. What happens if we know that nobody checked it? Not a single adult male checked this house, but a woman says, I checked, or 8-year-old child says, I checked, or David Kanani says, I checked. Can we trust the bedika of a child or not? Says the Gemara. You might have thought we shouldn't believe him. The midiraisa bitul bar mesagili. Binatera bitul's enough. Hemnura bono midura bono. So it comes out from this Gemara, unbelievable chiddush, that if your 10-year-old child, imagine you come home night because chametz, come home late for whatever reason, shouldn't come home late really because you said even though allowed to learn. But let's say you did, and your 10-year-old child says, "Daddy, you don't need to do it because chametz. I did it all for you." He's believed. Why is he believed? Since it's only a derabanan, therefore he's believed. Oh, what? Oh, I suppose he has to have a das to be able to say so. So here there's a very lot of cheshbon. So I want to put it like this. The Gemara also says, a woman, imagine your wife comes home and says, I did you a favor, I did b'dikas chametz for you. What's the halacha? So what's the din? What's the din? Believe her. Why do you believe her? Why do you believe her? Because the Gemara says it's derabanan. So let's say your wife would tell you about an issa d'oraisa. Would you believe her? Oh, just ask your kasha. Again, let's get the kasha clear. The Gemara says, why do you believe a woman? Why do you believe her? It's d'orabanan. Mashba, if we d'oraisa, you won't believe her. But if that would be the case, when you go home for supper tonight, and your wife says, I made you rice and meatballs. For all you know, milk got spilled into the meat. And that would be a deraisa. And it was no good. Why don't you worry about that? Because
then you rely on the fact that you didn't do something.
Okay, you live in that store, you come home, and your wife says, I took 2 slices of the fruit. You trust her? You do? Why? What's the only with abundance? It says taste, it's not good taste to tell your wives. The Gemara Tosa answers the question. The Tosa answers. Imagine now you open the window a bit more, I'm a bit hot. Tosa answers a very interesting answer. B'dikas shkoch, thank you very much. Tosa answers that b'dikas chametz is very difficult, and women, he says, tend to be lazy. That's what Tosa says. Not about study you're saying. Since they're lazy, you shouldn't come over and tell this to your wife, because nowadays it's all changing. Tosa says that women are lazy. And since they're lazy, because chametz is a very hard job, so therefore, if it would be an issa min haTorah, we wouldn't believe her. But since it's only d'Rabbanan, we believe her. That's what Tosa says. Masha'in kein Tumas HaMaisvus says Tosa. Says Tosa, Tumas HaMaisvus is dead easy. So therefore, we believe her by the Raisas. That's what Tosa says. So says the Aruch HaShulchan. I didn't know what to do with this Tosa. Actually, I must admit, I didn't see it. Rashi says, go and look in the Aruch HaShulchan. Look at the Aruch HaShulchan. He says, what happens is, I bought some vegetables. The Aruch HaShulchan writes a long shikul. And what happened was, my wife told me she checked it for flies. And I thought about this Tosus, and I thought to myself, checking for flies is hard work. And flies is the Raisa. So how can I rely on my wife? That's all Chashochan writes, a long arichas. So what he does is, he says you can, and he comes up with different svors why it's not really a deraisa. He says because often it is crushed the flies, and therefore it's not a barrier, so therefore it's bottle, and it's only a suffix, all kinds of svors. Rashi adds that even though we pass like this Aruch HaShulchan, not those who are chilek, that by deraisas one should be careful if it's a difficult thing not to rely on. So that's one Tosa. Let's get the beginning of Tosa. Let's just see Tosa a little bit. No, Afgav the Chodova should be Yodom. Memnina lo lenosh v'avodah afilu b'deraisa. The ma'ase b'cholim should ma'aminim leisho v'evda la'ashchit v'la'niku kav v'chlose yet. Ma'aseh suvichli nechalo ma'ase l'gmos mashva. The Gemara says that if a person's got a wife who feeds him fruit which is not taken to a semisis from, he's allowed to ask for a divorce, right? It's one of the reasons he's allowed to ask for divorce. Why? Because you can say, I can't come home to eat. If you find out the wife's giving you, so he says, mashma, that a normal person is allowed to rely on his wife. That's says Tosfos, what's the case with God Tchum Shabbos? We had it in Eruvin, that the Maisa, we believe them Legabe Tchum Shabbos. So the question is, why is it that by children, if you remember in Eruvin, we do not believe a child by Tchum Shabbos, but women we do believe? Why do you believe women? Why do you believe women are not children regarding Tchum Shabbos? Let's say, for example, you're walking on the countryside, and your child says to you, "I know that last week my Weber walked further than this, so we can walk further." What's the halacha? You can't trust the child. But if your wife says to you, you can. This says over here it's different, because over here it's biyodom. She could have checked the house for chametz. Since it's in her hands, we believe it. So by shaking, so he says by women have the ability to remember correctly. A child doesn't. The only reason over here we trust the child is because it's biyodom, it is in his hands to be able to do it. I just want to say that the Ran argues this whole Tosfos altogether, and he says that the Gemara never meant to say by women. You misunderstood the Gemara, he says. No, it's not like that. The Ran says that the Gemara meant only by children. It means you have to read the Gemara like this. With the rice, is only referring to the children. The wives, even by the rices, there'll be nemon. And according to this Ran, you'd be no problem eating tumas amaisis from your wife. Okay. And they're not lazy. Right, that's right. According to the Ran, you don't need to come on to the fact they're lazy. The Gemara is only talking about children, it's not talking about the rice. Okay. Let's say that. Okay, we'll go weiter. This is a very interesting shayla because it comes up in the Mishpat. The person rents a house, and he was told. This is how the Rishonim explain. He was told that the house has been checked, and then he finds out that it wasn't checked. So is a mekach tov. So the first question is, that's the they discuss. He was told, but without it being on condition. It wasn't a Tanai Kofar. He was told you should just be aware that the house has been checked for chametz. But the Maisa, it wasn't part of the Tanai. And now he wants to back out. And the question the Gemara Rashi explains is like this. The person's saying, I want to back out. Why do I want to back out? You promised me that it's checked, and it's not checked. Do we say that's a fair argument? Like, I buy something from you, you tell me this car, for example, is only 50,000 miles on the clock. And it's on 100,000 miles on the clock. So I say, actually, I don't want it, right? Or do we say, what's the other side? He said to me, it's checked. And Mai says it's not checked. So what's the svod that's not mekachtos? Says Rashi, interesting svod. But Emes, the person is happy to check for the house for chametz. And the fact that he told you he doesn't care about it. On the contrary, he's thrilled because that way he gets the opportunity to do the mitzvah himself. So are we saying to you, I'm not thrilled? He's telling you, I want to change my mind. The reason he wants to change his mind is because there was another house that he found after he closed with you at a cheaper price. And he's trying to find the fault with the first house just to be able to change his mind. And he says, Rashi adds all this, and therefore people do this, and therefore it's not really a mekachtos. And it's very interesting because once by Shaila, somebody came in, I was very unnerved. Somebody came in, and the car broke down very quickly. And he said to the buyer said to the seller, I want my money back. So the seller said, you're right that you shouldn't have broken down. I'll have it repaired. You got the guarantee for me. The buyer said, no, I want to take it back. And the Dayan said, no, he's entitled to insist. The seller's entitled to insist, I'll fix it and keep it, and you can't change your mind. And the Dayan muttered that the person obviously found a cheaper car but a better deal, and that's the reason. It's nothing to do with this. He was just happy that it broke and that thing. I was a bit, not sure about it, but I didn't say anything, I was scared. And then afterwards, I spoke to the buyer a few weeks later. I said to him, by the way, tell me something. Why did you really? He said, yes, straight out. He has found his car. No, it wasn't cheeky. Something went wrong with the car. Okay, I understood his logic. It's not his right. Okay, so this is the shayla. I don't want to go off the point too much. Again, this is the question. A person rents that property, and he's told, wait a second, Moshe. You tell me the house has been checked for chometz. And I covered that, find the house not checked for chometz. Oh, that's the Gemara's shayla. Is it an integral part of the schirus, or is it not? Says what? Says what? Omar Abayas, Abaya Paskets. Yomi boy Basa to the Yavi Agro Bodku. There were certain places where they would pay people to do b'dikas chometz, and certain places that people do it for free. I mean, certain towns people do b'dikas chometz for free because they're happy to do the mitzvah for other people, and some people do it for money. Says Abayas, not only in a place where they do it for free, even in a place where it costs to get people to check your house. Let me just finish off a second. Like this, so the Abayas says, even in a place where it's normal to charge for b'dikas chometz, it is not a mekachtos. Let's remember this. It's not a mekachtos. Why is it not mekachtos? Because the person's happy to check the house. And the only reason why he's complaining, says Rashi, is because he found a better deal elsewhere, and it's nothing to do with it. Oh, he's telling you, I don't want to check for chometz. That's an excuse. Why do we believe him? Because people are happy to do b'dikas chometz, because it's a mitzvah, and even if they have to pay for it, they're happy to pay for a mitzvah. People are happy to pay for a mitzvah.
Free, but what mitzvah do I have for someone else's to get rid of someone else's chometz?
Because just like if I help you blow shofar, let's say I blow shofar for you, so I help you in cabinets of blowing shofar. If I check your chometz, I'm helping you keep the mitzvah of Kol Yisrael Avivim. So that's awesome. Now we're going to a new topic. It's very clear. We said before there are 3 times there of Pesach. There's the early morning, which is mutter completely. There's after chatzot, which is awesome in Hatayah, and there's in between stage, which is awesome in Durabot. It's not awesome. Mishnah says, you can eat the whole 5th hour. The Sefer Tchilas Sheish, you have to burn the beginning of the 6th, because the end of the 6th is already awesome in Hatayah. Rabbi Yehuda, you can eat for the 4 hours, but the 5th hour you're not allowed to eat, because we're scared that if you're going to eat, you'll get so involved in eating, etc. It's with Durabot. The Sefer Tchilas Sheish. The Kuliyam, everybody agrees, Mia. Everybody agrees that after 6 hours you're not allowed to own chometz. We're not on how do we know it. So we're going to have now a very, very long Gemara, which will not finish today. How do I know that you're not allowed to have chometz after midday on Erev Pesach? Now, interesting thing is that we have another Gemara in next Perek. How do you know you're not allowed to eat chometz? And it's 2 separate shaylas. One is not allowed to eat chometz, and one is not allowed to own chometz. This is 2 shaylas. It says the word like this. How do I know? Omar Abayim. There are 2 psukim written in the Torah regarding chometz, and if you look and think about them, they're a little bit contradictory. It says, Shivas Yomim, for 7 days you must not have any chometz in your house. That's the entire 7 days. Another pasuk, that you must get rid of chometz on the 1st day. Now, what does this mean? Simple chat would be on the 1st of the 7th. But if you're going to get rid of chometz on the 1st day of the 7th, then part of that day you'll still have chametz, right? Pasuk says 7 days must have chametz. On the first day, get rid of chametz. If the first day means the first of the 7, so on the first day of the 7, in the middle of the day, get rid of the chametz. So you're only having 6.5 days without chametz, because on the first day of the 7, you had chametz for part of the time. Okay, side the pasuk must be coming to tell you that the day before you have to get rid of chametz, and when the pasuk says biyom avishon, it means the day before. And that way, if you get rid of it on the day before, then indeed you have a full 7 days. So now the Gemara says maybe the pasuk is coming to tell us something else. Maybe the pasuk is coming to tell you that you have to get rid of chametz the night of the 15th. That means say the night, you must get rid of it. Why? The Torah only says Shivas Yomim, 7 days. Yomim and Leilos Loi, that you're allowed to have chametz. At night, Komash Malon Afilu Leilos. That means maybe when the pasuk says Ach be'imorishim tashpisu sobi botechem, the pasuk is not coming to tell you that you have to get rid of it on the day before Pesach. It's coming to tell you have to get rid of it on the night of Pesach, which is the night of Seder night. And that's what the pasuk says, be'imorishim. It says, well, that's not what the pasuk is coming for. Every so often we go past the daf and try to finish off a topic. Here we're going to go through 5-6 lines maybe. And that is that there's something called at the top of Hey Amud Hekesh. What's a Hekesh? Well, the Torah mentions 2 things together, we learn one from the other. And here we have what's called a double Hekesh. The Torah has a Hekesh from not eating chametz to getting rid of chametz. I mean, the Torah mentions them together, getting rid of chametz and not eating chametz. It's 2 separate issues. And the Torah mentions the mitzvah of eating matzah with the mitzvah of not eating chametz. That means the Torah mentions not eating matzah with not eating chametz, and not eating chametz with getting rid of chametz. And we don't like this. The mitzvah of eating matzah is when does it start? When Pesach comes in. So from there we learn the mitzvah of not eating chametz also starts when Pesach comes in. And once we know the mitzvah of not eating chametz starts when Pesach comes in, so the mitzvah of getting rid of chametz is already when Pesach came in. So the pasuk does not need to teach me that you're not allowed to have chametz the night of Seder night, because I know that from the double hekesh. The fact that Torah compares getting rid of chametz with eating chametz, and eating chametz and eating matzah teaches me that already from the 15th I'm already. Getting rid of chametz, la'achilas chametz, eating chametz. Va'achilas chametz, achilas matzah. And the Gemara explains how do we know it. La'achilas chametz tichsiv. Shivas yomim so'oi li'motzei be'votechem. 7 days you must not have chametz. Anybody who eats it gets cursed. So in this pasuk we're comparing getting rid of chametz with the issa of eating chametz. Where do we see that hekesh? Don't eat chametz, rather eat matzah. So once we know that you have to eat matzahs the night of Pesach, and we know therefore by hekesh that you have to get rid of you mustn't eat chametz. And another hekesh, if you have to not allowed to eat chametz, you have to get rid of your chametz. So if I don't need the pasuk ach tell me before. Pay them all. The pasuk says by Yom HaVishon tashpisu soy b'vatechem. And we're explaining by Yom HaVishon means which day. Which day does by Yom HaVishon mean? It doesn't mean the first day of Pesach, because that won't make any sense. Because that would mean that you only get rid of your chametz on Pesach. So we translated the word by Yom HaVishon to mean the day before. If it means the day before, so who told you to wait till midday? You should actually wait and get rid of your chametz the night of B'tikas chametz. That should be the night you should get rid of it, because the Torah says Ach b'Yom HaVishon on the first day, and we're translating b'Yom HaVishon meaning the day before. So you should get rid of your chametz the night of B'tikas chametz. It says well, no, b'Yom Ksiv. It says Ach b'Yom HaVishon on the day. Okay, it says well, V'ema Mitzafa. So maybe the minute you wake up in the morning on Erev Pesach, you should get rid of it, because the Torah says Ach b'Yom HaVishon on the first day, and we translate to b'Yom HaVishon meaning the day before. Ach chilek. The word Ach always comes to divide. Ach chilek. The word Ach always comes to divide. Rashi is a very, very interesting thing that in gematrias there are many different ways of gematrias. We're always used to the simplest one. Aleph is 1, base is 2, Gimel is 3, etc. There are other gematrias, for example, at Bash, where Aleph is like Tov, base is like Shin, Gimel is like Reish. Have you heard of these gematrias? There's another one, Rashi tells us over here, that you skip out every 7 letters. Aleph is like Ches, base is like Tes, and Gimel is like Yud. It's a kind of gematria. If you take the word Ach, it comes to the word Chetz, which is made Chatzos, half. So Ach b'Yom HaRishon. Chatzos, half of Yom HaRishon, you have to get rid of your chametz. So only half of the first day. So this is only one of the makoros. We're going to have many more. That it comes out that Erev Pesach from midday, you're not allowed to eat chametz. It comes so okay, we'll finish on time, Hashem. We're starting from Tibei Rabbi Shmuel, another makor, another source that you mustn't have chametz after midday on Pesach. On Erev Pesach. Shkoyach. Yes. No, Achli Rishon means and plus the day before. 7 days plus the day before.